Family betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. When your own flesh and blood turns against you, the wound never truly heals. I discovered this truth at 62 years old, in my own living room, wearing my Sunday best. The glob of spit landed just inches from my freshly polished church shoes. I froze, staring at that wet circle on my clean floor. My Bible trembled in my hands as I slowly raised my eyes to meet his. My son Desmond, my only child, the baby I carried beneath my heart for 9 months, the boy I raised alone for 27 years, looked back at me with nothing but cold contempt. "You smelling old hag." The words exploded from his mouth, each syllable a slap across my face. "Always nagging. Ain't nobody wanna live with some washed-up woman acting like she still matter." My legs weakened beneath me. Not from age, though at 62, my knees weren't what they used to be, but from the sheer weight of that moment. The lavender dress I'd saved 3 months to buy suddenly felt too tight. The living room walls seemed to close in as my world collapsed. How had we arrived here? How had my sweet boy transformed into this sneering stranger? I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by his expensive collar and shake him until the son I raised returned to me. But all I could manage was a whisper. "Desmond. This is my home." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that held no trace of the giggles that once filled these same rooms when he was small. "Your home? This dump? Please, Lorraine. Without me, you're nothing but a lonely old woman waiting to die." The room tilted slightly. He hadn't called me Mama in years, but hearing my first name spat from his lips like something dirty, that cut deeper than I could have imagined. I still remember the weight of him as a newborn, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I remember working double shifts at the nursing home, my hands cracked and bleeding, just so he could have new school clothes. I remember selling my mother's house, our family home for 3 generations, to pay for his college tuition. No student loans for my boy, I told myself as I signed away the only real asset I had. He'll have opportunities one never did. And now here he stood, in designer clothes I couldn't afford, spitting on my floor and calling me worthless. I gathered what remained of my dignity and walked silently to my bedroom, closing the door with a soft click that belied the hurricane raging inside me. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the lock. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, a stranger stared back. A woman with hollow eyes and slumped shoulders, beaten down by years of sacrifice that had led to this moment. That night, I cried into my pillow until there were no tears left. I prayed for guidance, for strength, for some explanation of where I'd gone wrong. The photos on my nightstand, Desmond's graduation, his first baseball game, his gap-toothed kindergarten smile, mocked me from their frames. But when the morning light crept through my curtains, something new had taken root alongside my heartbreak, a quiet, steely resolve. That spit on my floor wasn't just disrespect. It was a declaration of war. And what my son didn't understand, what he would soon learn the hard way, was that I had survived far worse than a cruel child's contempt. I am Lorraine Turner. I raised a child alone when his father abandoned us. I worked jobs that broke my body so my son could have a better life. I endured humiliation, exhaustion, and poverty without complaint. I am not just some smelling old hag. I am a woman who has bent but never broken. And that glob of spit on my living room floor? That disrespect that my son thought would crush me? It would end up costing him everything. I gave everything to Desmond. Everything. When Raymond walked out, our son was just 7 months old. I still remember standing in our driveway, baby on my hip, watching those taillights disappear around the corner. No goodbye, no child support, nothing but a hastily scrawled note, "I can't do this anymore." I had 2 choices, collapse or carry on. With a baby depending on me, collapsing wasn't an option. The nursing home hired me full-time. I'd change sheets, bathe residents, and clean bedpans until my fingers cracked and bled. Between shifts, I'd race home to feed Desmond, catching sleep in 20-minute increments whenever he napped. Some days, I was so exhausted I'd fall asleep standing up, only to jerk awake at the sound of his cries. When he started school, I picked up a second job cleaning offices at night. My mother would watch him until I could get home, both of us exhausted but managing. Every penny went toward giving him what he needed: good food, decent clothes, school supplies. Birthday presents were carefully saved for, Christmas planned months in advance. "You're going to college," I'd tell him each night as I tucked him in, no matter how late I'd gotten home. "You're going to have choices I never had." As Desmond grew, he showed promise. Smart, handsome, with a charm that could light up a room. Teachers praised his intelligence. Neighbors commented on his good manners. Each compliment felt like validation, proof that my sacrifices were worthwhile. But college costs money. More money than a nursing assistant with arthritis forming in her hands could ever save. I made the hardest decision of my life. I sold the house my mother had left me, our family home for 3 generations. The only real asset I had. The place filled with memories of my childhood, of my mother's laughter, of Desmond's first steps. "It's just a house," I told myself as I signed the papers, fighting back tears. "My son's future is worth more." We moved to a small apartment, and Desmond went off to college with no student loans to burden him. 4 years later, when he walked across that stage in his cap and gown, I wept openly. The midnight shifts, the missed school plays, the aching back, they had all been worth it. Or so I thought. After graduation, Desmond moved back home temporarily while looking for a job. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. The respectful boy I thought I'd raised began to show cracks in his facade. First came the small things. Dishes left in the sink. Lights left on all night. My requests for help met with heavy sighs or outright refusal. "I'm looking for work, Lorraine," he'd say, my name sounding strange from his lips. "I don't have time for chores." Yet somehow, he had time for parties. For his new girlfriend. For expensive shoes that mysteriously appeared despite his unemployment. One evening, I returned from a 12-hour shift to find him and his friends sprawled across my living room, beer bottles scattered everywhere, music blaring. When I asked them to keep it down, Desmond rolled his eyes. "Stop being so uptight," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "It's not like you own this place." But I did own it. Every inch of that small apartment had been paid for with my sweat and sacrifice. The boy who once brought me dandelions and hand-drawn cards now looked at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. The son who'd promised to take care of me when I'm old now couldn't be bothered to wash his own dishes. Where had I gone wrong? Had I given too much? Not enough? Had I failed to teach him the value of hard work, of respect, of gratitude? These questions kept me awake long after my body begged for rest. I'd stare at the ceiling, listening to him come home in the early morning hours, trying to pinpoint the moment my sweet boy had transformed into the stranger. Then came the night that changed everything. While cleaning up their mess after his friends left, I found something that made my heart sink: an empty wallet. My wallet. The one I kept in my purse. When I confronted Desmond the next morning, he shrugged casually. "I needed gas money. You'd have given it to me anyway if I asked." "That's not the point," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't take what isn't yours." He looked at me then, really looked at me, with an expression I'd never seen before. Like I was nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. "After everything I've done for you," I said quietly, "don't I deserve basic respect?" Desmond laughed. "Everything you've done? You were supposed to do those things. You're my mother. That was your job." The words hit me like a physical blow. Was that all my sacrifices meant to him? Just expected duty? But what I discovered later that week would make that moment seem trivial by comparison. What I found hidden in his room would shatter the last illusions I had about my son, and change both our lives forever. The discovery happened by accident. I was cleaning Desmond's room. Yes, even after everything, I still cleaned his room like he was a child instead of a grown man of 27. Old habits die hard, I suppose. As I was changing his sheets, I knocked over a stack of papers on his nightstand. Bending to gather them, my eyes caught the letterhead of First National Bank. Curious, I looked closer. My name was on those papers. Not Desmond's. Mine. Loan applications. Credit card statements. Financial documents, all in my name, but I hadn't applied for any of them. My hands trembled as I flipped through page after page. Thousands of dollars in debt. My signature forged with practiced precision. Identity theft. My own son had stolen my identity. I sank onto his bed, the documents scattered around me like fallen leaves. The room spun slightly as the implications sank in. My credit, the one thing I'd always protected carefully, was likely in ruins. My financial future, already precarious on my nursing home salary, now hung by a thread. How long had this been going on? How much had he taken? I forced myself to methodically gather every paper, creating a neat stack that I took to my room and locked in my closet safe, the one place Desmond didn't have access to. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the apartment made me start, wondering if he was up, if he'd discovered I knew his secret. By morning, I had dark circles under my eyes and a decision in my heart. I would not confront him yet. I needed more information. I needed proof. The next day, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Once Desmond left, not for job hunting I now realized, but for whatever he did with his days, I began a systematic search of his room. Behind his dresser, I found more statements. Under his mattress, a notebook with my personal information. Social security number, birth date, mother's maiden name. Everything a thief would need. In his closet, shopping bags from expensive stores, tags still attached to designer clothes. All purchased with credit cards in my name. My hands shook with anger as I carefully photographed everything, then returned it exactly as I'd found it. The final blow came later that week. I was returning from the grocery store when I saw Desmond's girlfriend, Tasha, sitting alone on the steps of my apartment building. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Miss Lorraine," she said when she saw me, quickly wiping her face. "I need to talk to you." We sat in my car, grocery bags forgotten in the trunk, as she poured out her story. Desmond had been using her too, borrowing money he never repaid, making promises he never kept, even flirting with her cousin behind her back. "I thought he loved me," she whispered, fresh tears trailing down her cheeks. "But he just wanted what he could get from me." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I understand more than you know." She looked at me then, hesitating. "There's something else. Something worse." My stomach tightened. "Tell me." Last week, I overheard him talking to his friend. They were drinking, and Desmond was bragging about some plan. She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He said he found a way to get your apartment. Something about convincing you to sign papers, then selling it from under you." The car suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. "My apartment? But why would he?" "He said you owed him for raising him with nothing. That it was payback for his broke childhood." Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Miss Lorraine. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore." I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel though the car wasn't running, trying to process this final betrayal. Not just theft of my money, but plans to take my home, my last refuge. The son I'd given everything to wanted to leave me with nothing. Something crystallized inside me in that moment, hard and sharp and resolute. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about survival. "Tasha," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected, "would you be willing to help me?" She looked surprised, then nodded firmly. "Whatever you need." As we carried the groceries inside, a plan was already forming in my mind. What Desmond didn't know was that before I was his mother, I was Lorraine Turner. And Lorraine Turner had survived abandonment, poverty, and backbreaking work to build a life from nothing. If my son wanted war, he'd learn exactly who he was up against. But first, I needed to see just how far his betrayal went. That night, after he'd gone out with friends, I returned to his room with a flashlight. What I found hidden in his closet made my blood freeze. Transfer paperwork from my apartment, with a forged power of attorney document giving him control over my assets. My own son was planning to make me homeless. I moved carefully after that day, like a chess player positioning pieces before the opponent realizes the danger. First, I visited my bank. The manager's face grew increasingly grave as I explained the situation, showing him the forged documents. "This is serious, Ms. Turner," he said, lowering his voice. "What your son has done is criminal. Have you considered pressing charges?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Press charges against my own child? The baby I'd nursed through fevers, the boy I'd taught to read, the young man whose graduation had been the proudest moment of my life? But then I remembered his spit on my floor. The cold contempt in his eyes. The calculated theft of my identity. "I'm considering all options," I replied carefully. "For now, I need to protect what's left." We spent the next hour securing my accounts, changing passwords, placing fraud alerts, freezing credit. I opened a new account at a different bank where Desmond had no access and began transferring my limited savings there. Next, I met with a lawyer, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes but a voice like steel. I'd found her through a senior assistance program that offered reduced rates. "He's counting on your maternal love to protect him," she told me bluntly after hearing my story. Predators always exploit the bonds of those they target. Predator seemed such a harsh word for my own son. Yet, wasn't that exactly what he'd become? "What can I do?" I asked. "Document everything. Gather evidence. And most importantly, don't tip him off that you know." So began my double life. On the surface, I remained Desmond's dutiful mother, cooking his meals, washing his clothes, maintaining the facade of normalcy while he continued his charade of job hunting. But beneath that veneer, I was building my case. Tasha became my unexpected ally. She saved text messages where Desmond mentioned using my identity. She recorded a conversation where he bragged about managing my finances. She even introduced me to another friend he'd borrowed money from, who provided a sworn statement about Desmond's schemes. Meanwhile, I noticed changes at home. The cash in my wallet disappeared more frequently. Bills arrived that I didn't recognize. Desmond began asking pointed questions about my retirement savings. "You must have something stashed away," he pressed one evening. "All those years of working." I gave vague answers, watching his frustration grow as his access to easy money gradually dried up. His behavior worsened. Staying out all night. Bringing strangers to the apartment. The respectful facade he'd maintained in public crumbled entirely in private. One night, he stormed into my bedroom while I was reading, demanding money for car repairs. "I'm broke right now," I said simply. "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "I know you got paid yesterday." I looked up from my book, meeting his eyes calmly. "My money is already spoken for." His face contorted with rage. "After everything I've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, Desmond?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, quiet but pointed. For a moment, he seemed taken aback by the direct challenge. Then his eyes narrowed. I gave you purpose, he spat. Without me, what would you even be? Just some pathetic old woman with nothing and nobody. Each word was designed to wound, to remind me of my greatest fears, aging alone, unloved, forgotten. Once, they might have worked. Once, I might have handed over my last dollar just to keep peace, just to feel needed. But not anymore. I turned a page in my book. If you need money, perhaps it's time to find a job. He slammed my bedroom door so hard a picture fell from the wall, the glass cracking against the floor. That night, I heard him on the phone, his voice urgent, angry. She's getting suspicious. No, I need more time. The papers aren't ready yet. I knew then that the moment of confrontation was approaching faster than I'd planned. Desmond was growing desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. 2 days later, I found what he'd been hiding in his room. Transfer paperwork from my apartment, with a forged power of attorney document giving him control over my assets. The last piece of evidence I needed. It was time to end this game. And what would happen next would change both our lives forever, because when Desmond came home the following day, he'd find something he never expected, his mother, standing her ground, with the police just a phone call away. The morning I decided to act dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that normally would have lifted my spirits. I'd been planning this moment for weeks, rehearsing what I would say, steeling myself for Desmond's reaction. I made his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with maple syrup, crispy bacon on the side. A last meal of sorts, though he didn't know it. What's the occasion? He asked suspiciously as he slouched into the kitchen, eyeing the spread. No occasion, I replied, keeping my voice light. Just felt like cooking. We ate in silence, the ticking of the kitchen clock unusually loud. When he finished, I poured us both fresh coffee and sat down across from him. Desmond, we need to talk. He glanced at his watch. Make it quick. I've got places to be. I placed a folder on the table between us and opened it slowly. Inside were copies of everything, the forged loan applications, the credit card statements, the power of attorney document, Tosh's sworn statement, bank records showing withdrawals I never made. What is this? His voice was sharp with sudden wariness. This is theft, fraud, and identity theft, I said quietly. This is my son stealing from his mother. His face cycled through emotions rapidly. Surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, a cold smirk that chilled me to the bone. Prove it's not just bad bookkeeping, he said with a shrug. Who's going to believe some confused old woman over her college-educated son? The casual cruelty of his response struck me silent for a moment. Not denial. Not apology. Just contempt for my intelligence, my agency, my worth. The police will believe the evidence, I finally replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The district attorney will believe the bank records. The judge will believe the forged documents. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. You wouldn't. I already have. It wasn't entirely true. I hadn't gone to the police yet. I'd wanted to give him one chance, one opportunity to show remorse, to make amends. Some foolish part of me still hoped for redemption. You're bluffing, he said, but doubt had crept into his voice. Am I? I reached for my phone. Let's find out. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist hard enough to bruise. Don't you dare. 27 years of maternal instinct warred with self-preservation as we locked eyes across the table. For a heartbeat, I saw the little boy who'd once cried when he scraped his knee, who'd made me Mother's Day cards with crooked letters and too much glue. Then I saw the man who'd spat at my feet and called me a smelling old hag. Let go of my arm, I said quietly. Or what? His grip tightened. Or the officers waiting outside will have one more charge to add. His head whipped toward the window. I'd arranged for Tosh's cousin, a security guard, to park his official-looking car outside, just visible from our kitchen. It wasn't police, but Desmond didn't know that. He released my wrist and stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. This is how you treat your own son? After everything I've done for you? What exactly have you done for me, Desmond? I asked for the second time that week. Name one thing. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I stayed. When I could have gone anywhere after college, I stayed with you. You stayed to use me, I corrected gently. To take my money. To forge my name. To try to steal my home. His face darkened. You're nothing without me. Who's going to take care of you when you're old? Who's going to visit you? You think those nursing home patients you wipe down will remember you? Each question was a blade, expertly aimed at my deepest fears. Once they would have cut deep. Once they would have made me back down, made me choose his approval over my own welfare. Not today. I'd rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by thieves, I said, rising to my feet. You have two choices, Desmond. 1. You sign a confession, agree to repayment, and move out today. 2. I call the real police right now. His laugh was ugly, desperate. You're bluffing. You won't do it. You're too weak. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd programmed days ago. Officer Rodriguez? Yes, it's Lorraine Turner. I'm ready to file that report now. Desmond's face transformed as he realized this wasn't a bluff. Panic replaced arrogance. Wait! He shouted, lunging for the phone. Hang up. I'll sign whatever you want. But it was too late. Too late for easy promises. Too late for manipulation. Too late for anything but consequences. The police arrived 30 minutes later. I handed over my carefully organized evidence as Desmond watched in stunned disbelief. You're pressing charges against your own son? The female officer asked quietly while her partner interviewed Desmond in the other room. I looked through the doorway at my child, the baby I'd carried, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd become a stranger. Yes, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Because he needs to learn that actions have consequences, and love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you. As they led Desmond away in handcuffs, his reaction wasn't what anyone expected. Not anger. Not more threats. Instead, he turned to me with wide, pleading eyes, suddenly looking like the little boy who'd once depended on me for everything. Mama, he whispered, using the name he'd abandoned years ago. Don't let them take me. Please. For a moment, my resolve wavered. For a moment, I was just a mother watching her child in pain. But then I remembered everything. The theft, the lies, the spit on my floor. I turned away as they led him to the patrol car, his desperate cries echoing in the apartment complex courtyard. Mama! Mama! Don't do this. The hardest step I ever took was turning my back and closing that door. The legal process moved forward with grinding slowness. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Desmond hired a lawyer, paid for, I later learned, with more stolen funds from another victim. His defense strategy became clear at our first court appearance. Paint me as a vindictive, mentally unstable mother persecuting her devoted son over misunderstandings. Miss Turner is experiencing early cognitive decline, his attorney told the judge smoothly. She authorized these transactions but has forgotten doing so. This is a family matter that should never have entered a courtroom. The judge, a woman about my age with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes, turned to me. Miss Turner, do you wish to respond? I stood, knees trembling slightly beneath my modest dress. Public speaking had never been my strength. But truth gave my voice steadiness. Your Honor, I've spent my life caring for others. First my son, then elderly patients. I know what cognitive decline looks like. What I'm experiencing isn't confusion. It's clarity. I held up my bank statements. These aren't misunderstandings. They're forgeries. My son didn't ask for help. He stole my identity, my savings, and was preparing to take my home. My voice caught, but I pushed forward. I raised him better than this. I loved him better than this. And because I still love him, I'm doing the hardest thing a mother can do. I'm holding him accountable. Something in the judge's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition perhaps, from one woman to another. Proceed, she told the prosecutor. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records. Forged signatures. Witness testimonies. Desmond's arrogant text messages, boasting about his schemes. His strategy shifted from denial to minimization. It was just borrowing, he claimed. I was going to pay it all back. But the power of attorney document, the one he'd prepared to take control of my apartment, shattered that defense. This was no impulsive mistake. This was calculated, sustained fraud. 3 court dates later, facing mounting evidence, Desmond's lawyer approached with a plea deal, guilty to lesser charges, repayment of stolen funds, community service. The prosecutor explained it to me gently. If you accept, he'll avoid jail time. If we proceed to trial, he's looking at 2 to 5 years. 2 to 5 years. My son. In prison. I closed my eyes, remembering him as a toddler, taking his first steps across our living room floor. His kindergarten graduation. His first baseball game. Then I remembered his spit on my floor. His grip on my wrist. His cold voice, "You smelling old hag." "Miss Turner?" The prosecutor prompted. "What do you want to do?" What did I want? The question echoed inside me. For decades, what I wanted hadn't mattered. My needs, my dreams, my very self had been subordinated to motherhood, to survival, to Desmond's future. Now, finally, someone was asking what I wanted. "I want justice," I said softly. "Not revenge. Justice." "And what does justice look like to you in this case?" I thought carefully before answering. Full repayment of everything taken. Community service helping the elderly he so despises. And yes, some time in jail. Not to punish him, but to give him time to reflect on his choices. The prosecutor nodded. "I'll tell them we're rejecting the plea offer." When the judge delivered the sentence 2 weeks later, 18 months in state prison plus 5 years probation, Desmond looked at me with naked hatred. "How could you do this to your own son?" he shouted as officers approached to take him away. The judge banged her gavel. "Mr. Turner, your mother didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself." As they led him away, I remained seated, hands folded in my lap, tears streaming silently down my face. An older gentleman sitting nearby, there for another case, leaned over. "That was brave what you did." I shook my head. "It doesn't feel brave. It feels terrible." "The right thing often does," he replied gently. "Doesn't make it any less right." Outside the courtroom, Tasha waited for me, her face solemn. "Are you okay?" she asked, linking her arm through mine. "No," I answered honestly. "But I will be." Walking down those courthouse steps, I felt the weight of maternal guilt threatening to crush me. But with each step, another feeling grew stronger, the quiet certainty that sometimes, love requires the courage to allow consequences. My son was going to prison. My heart was broken. But for the first time in years, I was walking toward a future that belonged to me. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined as I walked away from that courthouse, was that Desmond's time in prison would change him in ways neither of us expected. And when he returned, The final chapter of our story would be written in ways that would test us both beyond anything we'd faced before. Life changed in ways both practical and profound after Desmond went to prison. First came the practical matters. I had to rebuild my credit, working with the banks to remove the fraudulent accounts. I found a financial counselor through a community program who helped me establish a modest but secure plan for my remaining working years. My apartment, the home Desmond had tried to take, became truly mine again. I painted the walls colors I loved, arranged furniture how I wanted it, played the gospel music I'd avoided because it annoyed my son. Tasha and I remained friends, an unexpected blessing from a painful situation. She was studying nursing, and sometimes we'd sit at my kitchen table, her textbooks spread out between us, as I shared stories from my years of patient care. "You should teach," she told me one evening. "You know so much." The idea took root. I approached the director of my nursing home about starting a training program for new aides. To my surprise, she embraced the concept enthusiastically. By the 1-year mark of Desmond's sentence, I was working fewer floor shifts and teaching 2 classes a week, sharing decades of experience with young people who actually valued what I had to offer. The profound changes were harder to quantify but even more significant. I learned to value my own company, to see solitude not as loneliness but as peace. I joined a support group for parents of incarcerated children and found understanding without judgment. I reconnected with my church, drawing strength from faith I'd neglected during Desmond's destructive years. Most importantly, I learned to recognize my worth beyond motherhood. For so long, I'd measured my value by Desmond's success, his happiness, his needs. Now, I began to see myself as whole, a woman with skills, wisdom, and purpose beyond raising a child. Then came the letter. 14 months into Desmond's sentence, an envelope arrived with the prison's return address. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page filled with Desmond's familiar handwriting. "Lorraine. They're letting me out early next month. Good behavior. I've changed. I've had time to think about everything. I know I messed up. I want to make things right. I don't have anywhere else to go. I need to stay with you until I get on my feet. Just for a little while. I'm still your son. Blood is thicker than water. Family forgives. Desmond." No apology. No acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Just expectations. Assumptions. The same entitlement, thinly veiled behind manipulative appeals to family obligation. I sat with that letter for days, turning it over in my mind during quiet moments at work, during my evening prayers, during my morning coffee. What did I owe my son? What did it mean to be a good mother now? The answer came gradually, not as a lightning bolt of clarity but as a quiet dawn of understanding. Being a good mother didn't mean being a doormat. It didn't mean enabling destructive behavior. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries. So I wrote back. "Desmond. I'm glad to hear you're being released early. That suggests you've followed rules and made good choices. I hope that continues. I've thought long and hard about your request to stay with me. The answer is no. This isn't about punishment or anger. It's about health, yours and mine. Living together again would be returning to patterns that harmed us both. I've enclosed information about transitional housing programs for released inmates, along with the name of a counselor who specializes in family reconciliation. If you're truly interested in making things right, that's where the work begins. Not with moving back in, but with healing the trust that was broken. I am, and always will be, your mother. I love you. But love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's surrender. Lorraine." The day of his release arrived with spring sunshine and blooming dogwoods. Though I hadn't agreed to house him, I did drive to the prison, parking across the street to watch as he walked through the gates. He looked thinner, older somehow, despite being only 29. He carried a small bag of belongings, scanning the pickup area with obvious expectation. I watched him search for me, watched his expression change from anticipation to confusion to anger as he realized I wasn't coming to collect him. Finally, he pulled out his phone, one I hadn't paid for, and made a call, shoulders hunched against rejection. A car arrived 30 minutes later. A friend, perhaps, or another relative. Desmond got in without looking back, and they drove away. My eyes burned with unshed tears as I started my own car. I had done the right thing. The necessary thing. The loving thing. But it still hurt like nothing else. 3 weeks later, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. Desmond stood on my threshold, better dressed than when he'd left prison, a small bouquet of mixed flowers clutched awkwardly in one hand. "Lorraine," he said stiffly. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, my hand tight on the doorknob. "That depends on what you want to talk about." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "I need to say some things. About what happened. About what I did." I studied him, searching for signs of manipulation, finding instead something that looked almost like genuine discomfort. Not guilt, perhaps, but at least awareness. I didn't invite him in. Instead, I stepped onto the small porch, closing the door behind me. "I'm listening," I said. What followed wasn't a movie-perfect apology. It was halting, incomplete. He acknowledged mistakes, rather than deliberate choices. He focused more on his suffering in prison than my suffering at his hands. But it was something. A beginning, perhaps. When he finished, I nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming. For saying those things." He shuffled his feet, looking suddenly younger. "So, can I come stay now? Just until I get a job?" The old Lorraine might have relented. Might have opened her door and her heart, hoping this time would be different. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "No, Desmond. That hasn't changed." His face hardened. "After I apologized? After everything?" "An apology doesn't erase consequences," I said gently. "Trust takes time to rebuild." "So what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go?" The familiar edge of accusation crept back into his voice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. "There's information about a job placement program here. And I've paid for 2 months at the transitional apartment complex on Cedar Street. After that, it's up to you." He stared at the envelope, not taking it. "You're really doing this? Turning away your only child?" "I'm not turning you away, Desmond. I'm giving you a chance to become the man I know you can be, on your own terms with your own efforts." He took the envelope finally, his movements stiff with pride and anger. "This isn't what a mother does," he muttered. "Actually," I replied quietly, "this is exactly what a mother does when she truly loves her child. She helps them grow up, even when it's hard. Even when it hurts them both." I watched him walk away, shoulders hunched against the weight of responsibility he'd avoided for so long. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no embrace, no tearful reconciliation. Just a quiet moment of truth between a mother and son who had both lost their way and were finding new paths forward. Separately, but perhaps someday, alongside each other again. 5 years have passed since that day on my porch. My life now bears little resemblance to those dark days when Desmond's contempt filled my home. I retired from full-time nursing but still teach twice a week at the community college, sharing decades of experience with eager students. My apartment is paid off, a small miracle of careful saving. My credit has been restored. Most importantly, I've built a life full of purpose and connection that has nothing to do with being someone's mother. I volunteer with elderly shut-ins, people who truly appreciate the time and care I give them. I joined a senior travel group and have seen parts of the country I never dreamed of visiting. I tend a small community garden plot where I grow vegetables for the local food pantry. Tasha graduated nursing school and often stops by with her new baby, a little girl she named after her grandmother. Sometimes we talk about Desmond, but mostly we talk about her studies, her hopes, her future. As for my son, our relationship has evolved in ways I never expected. After those first difficult months, Desmond did find work. Construction at first, then eventually training as an electrician. He lives in an apartment across town, pays his bills, and has begun slowly to repay what he stole from me. We meet for coffee once a month. Our conversations are careful, measured, nothing like the easy affection of his childhood or the volatile hostility of his 20s. But there is progress. Small admissions of wrongdoing. Occasional glimpses of the good man I always believed he could become. Last Christmas, he brought his new girlfriend to dinner. A serious woman with kind eyes who works as a paralegal. The way she watches him, evaluates him, makes me think she won't tolerate the behavior I once did. That gives me hope. We will never have the relationship I dreamed of when I first held him in my arms 67 years ago. Too much has happened. Too many harsh words have been spoken. Too many lines have been crossed. But we are finding our way towards something new, something built on earned respect rather than obligation. Something that honors both his autonomy and my boundaries. The most profound lesson of this journey has been one I wish I'd learned decades earlier. Love without limits isn't love at all. True love, whether for a child, a partner, a friend or ourselves, requires boundaries. Requires respect. Requires the courage to say no, when saying yes would damage both giver and receiver. For too many years, I confused sacrifice with love, martyrdom with motherhood. I believed that erasing myself for my child's benefit was the ultimate expression of maternal devotion. I was wrong. The greatest gift we can give those we love is to show them how to treat others with dignity. How to take responsibility for their actions. How to face consequences with courage. How to build lives of integrity. We cannot teach these things if we ourselves become doormats. We cannot show others how to respect us if we abandon self-respect. Sometimes, the most loving act is to stand firm when someone tries to push your boundaries. To maintain dignity when they try to strip it away. To value yourself enough to walk away from abuse, even when, especially when, it comes from those closest to you. That day when Desmond spat at my feet and called me a smelling old hag wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The beginning of reclaiming my power, my voice, my worth. If you're reading this and recognizing your own situation, if someone you love is treating you as less than you deserve, know this: it is never too late to draw a line. Never too late to say enough. Never too late to love yourself as fiercely as you've loved others. Because true strength isn't found in enduring mistreatment. It's found in recognizing your inherent dignity and demanding that others recognize it too. That's what I took back from my son. Not just material possessions or financial security, but something far more precious: my self-respect. My dignity. My right to be treated with basic human decency. And in doing so, I gave him the opportunity to become a better man than he would have been if I had continued to enable his cruelty. This journey has taught me that we all have three families in this life: the one we're born into, the one we create, and the one that finds us when we need it most. That third family, the support group members who held my hand through court dates, the church ladies who brought casseroles when I couldn't cook, the elderly patients whose gratitude reminded me of my value, they helped me rebuild when my first family shattered. At 67, I'm not the woman I thought I'd be. I'm stronger. Wiser. More whole. I once believed that a mother's job was to give everything away, her time, her money, her very self, until nothing remained. Now I understand that a mother's true job is to model wholeness. To show her children what healthy love looks like. To demonstrate that respect is not optional but essential. Yesterday, Desmond called. Not to ask for anything, just to check in. A small thing perhaps, but 5 years ago, it would have been unimaginable. As we talked about ordinary things, the weather, his work, my garden, I felt something that had been missing for decades: peace. Not perfect happiness, not the fairy tale ending I once dreamed of, but something more sustainable, more real. Sometimes the greatest act of love is simply to stand your ground and say, I deserve better than this. And so do you. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, the people who've hurt you eventually come to understand that your boundaries weren't rejection. They were the most profound form of love you had to offer.